In other news, combative words from the new Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang, telling reporters at his first ever press conference that the US needs to change its distorted attitude towards China or face conflict and confrontation. The Foreign Minister also defending Beijing's close ties with Russia. He said Washington had been engaging in suppression and containment of China rather than engaging in fair, rule-based competition. Let's take a listen to what he had to tell reporters earlier.
If the United States does not hit the brakes but continues to speed down the wrong path, no amount of guardrails can prevent derailing or a crash, and there will surely be conflict and confrontation.
And joining me in the studio is Pierre-Antoine, a former AFP correspondent in Beijing for the French news agency. Thank you very much for coming in, Pierre-Antoine.
My pleasure.
How concerned should we be about the Foreign Minister's remarks?
Well, first of all, it's the first time that Xi Jinping himself criticized the United States with such harsh words. Usually he has been asking other people to do that, and now he's talking himself. As to the Foreign Minister words, this is also an escalation in the war of words. So I think that this is a stern warning to the United States that China will react at some point.
It does seem that lines are being drawn in the sand globally between authoritarian leaders and Western-style democracies, doesn't it?
Well, you see, I guess that the Chinese regime feels that now there is a coalition starting to be united against China, naming, of course, the United States, but also Japan, Australia, South Korea, and even Europe. So feeling that, the Chinese regime feels like, the only alternative is to side with Russia, and this is very dangerous for the world.
As a result, is an invasion of Taiwan more likely than ever?
It is, but we are still not there, because Beijing, they know very well that if they start the war, they are likely to lose that war at present. So that may happen later on, but again, the risk is growing now.
You're certainly seeing a response from Washington which is toughening up their stance. Where do you see things heading as a result?
All along, Joe Biden has been very cautious not to provoke China. He has left the door open for negotiations with Xi Jinping. And another sign of worries in Taiwan is that Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen asked the leader of the Congress not to travel to Taiwan and instead to meet her in California in the United States.
Now, France has a sizable presence in the South Pacific. I imagine that they are just as equally concerned as Washington when they hear those bellicose remarks being made by the likes of the Foreign Minister.
The thing is that for the first time ever, the Foreign Minister and as well as Xi Jinping also targeted Europe. And that's also a sign that Beijing is becoming more nervous. And this is happening just a few weeks before the possible journey from French president to Beijing. So that's another alarming warning.
What are the French doing as a result? How are they going to respond to this stance?
It's difficult to say at that point, but what I know of is that Mr. Macron was going to Beijing having in mind to try to convince his partner, Mr. Xi Jinping, to make efforts to ask Vladimir Putin to stop the war in Ukraine. So with all what we see now, that may not happen.
So this is really an unforeseen consequence of the war in Ukraine, isn't it?
What I was saying, the Foreign Minister, is that on one side, you, the United States, you ask us not to provide weapons to Russia, but at the same time, you, the United States, you are giving arms, selling arms to Taiwan. So it's unfair. So where is it going to end? It's difficult to say, but obviously it's becoming more tense.
What do you see the Chinese doing in the months to come? How do you see them ramping up the pressure on the West and on Washington?
One thing is how the visit of Xi Jinping to Moscow is going to go on. Whenever he goes, there will be the official statement and what is said that we will not know of. But for China to sell or to give arms to Russia would be a red line for the United States as well as for its allies. If they do that, crossing the red lines, that would immediately means that the United States is going to impose sanctions on China, and that would be at a very delicate moment for China because the economy is going down.
And where does this leave Washington? I mean, at the beginning of the war, it was seen that China was somewhat playing both sides. Now, clearly, it seems to be casting its support towards Moscow, doesn't it?
Very much. So now there is no doubt that China is signing with Russia. Their so-called peace plan is really showing that they are on the side of Russia. So to what extent they are going to do more with Russia, this is a question mark. And also, would they go to war with Taiwan is also a question mark. Usually, the Chinese leadership is very cautious of what they do. They used to, think about the next step for weeks or months before doing something. But recently, we have seen some kind of nervousness, which is actually very worrisome.
And very reactive, isn't it?
It is. So I think we are entering a troubling zone where, what is going to happen is difficult to say. But in case they sell arms to Russia, that would mean that the consequences may be tragic.
Pierre-Antoine Donnet, from a former AFP correspondent in Beijing, thank you so much for your analysis.
Thank you very much.
And time now for Focus. In Tunisia,